Hey everyone, welcome back. And in today's video, I want to walk through some of the biggest myths, or you can even say perspective changes about life in the Sarasota, Florida greater metro. These are things to me that aren't necessarily good or bad, as much as if you could look at them from a different lens, then they could really open up a lot of your options when it comes to both day-to-day lifestyle and housing criteria. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to take 5 areas that I think if you could have a point of view from a slightly altered angle, then maybe you could both broaden your horizons as far as relocation options and simultaneously remove some of the stress that comes with picking that perfect spot. If we have not met, my name is Adam Hancock. If I can assist you within the Southwest Florida real estate market, please consider reaching out. Without further ado, let's hop in. All right, myth number 1 that I would like to cover in no particular order is the idea of just picking the wrong area, neighborhood, etc. You're coming from out of town, maybe you've never lived here. On top of that, you're possibly retiring. So this is your settling down spot. How much risk is tied to, I picked this area. It's different than I thought when I get there. I'm going to live differently. My money didn't go as far. And, if I make the wrong choice, I can't take that back. And I think the beauty with our area that's atypical to most other places you move is how it's shaped. It's the infrastructure. It's how narrow it is. It's that once you go west, it's water, so the only other place to go is east of it or north or south of that in the similar conversation, and how densely located all the stuff that everybody wants to be around are. And if you take like a Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, Orlando, Florida, even Tampa Bay, then they very much are towns that live in silos because you are making a commitment. If you live above Orlando, downtown Orlando, or below it, you're not going to be trekking and enjoying the whole rest of that metro realistically. If you live in Wesley Chapel, you're not going to be in downtown St. Pete every other minute. I do think there's a lot more that goes into that kind of conversation because it's eye of the beholder value. This is a town where it would be a little bit more difficult to mess up. It's really hard to get more than 30, 35 minutes one way. And that's not 30 to 35 miles. That's like 20 miles to equal that distance from pretty much everything that you'd want access to, which then allows you to focus on the house. It allows you to focus on the kind of the small circle of when you come home, like what's that, like your neighborhood amenities, maybe the communal amenities right outside of that, where you spend a lot of the majority of your time, maybe kids' schools, something like that, but not feel like that if I haven't, looked under every single rock, then I'm going to miss out on when I get here. I'm going to say, oh, well, if I would have known that was there, I would have went there, because you can kind of access everything within 4 or 5 total exits on the interstate. If you look at our area here, like if I zoom out, like to say that this is all Sarasota Manatee is not true. Like what we're talking about, what's in play here is a very narrow strip, like right here. Like this is the whole entire town. You have a lot of like Mayak out here and stuff, but this is the whole entire town. Everyone lives right here. So what you're doing as you get in here is you're saying, okay, like why am I here? What am I doing? Well, you have a downtown that's based right here. This is the main downtown urban thoroughfare, and the idea that you can go west and get everything in mainly one chunk means that like everything else is just like I live over here and I shoot up to that, or I live over here and I shoot down to that. But it's not like Tampa Bay. A lot of the value are located in different districts, and you're choosing what do you value, and you're trying to live near one. Probably not going to access all of them. That's not really the case here. So one, you're not really far from anything else in the entire town, but as far as everything that people want to get close to, there's only like 4 or 5 total things anyway, and they're all in like 3 locations basically. And so this is one of them. So you have the downtown, you have St. Armand Circle, Lido, Key Beach here, which is like shopping district in between. The main northern Siesta Key Beach is here, which is the main beach, which also the shopping. So you have like a 6-mile square radius. All this stuff is jammed within. Longboat Key up here, but even if you hug the southern side, you have access to that. And then you say, okay, like, what else is there? Well, a lot of the stuff right now is this Lakewood Ranch district right here, and you can see Waterside, all the lakes right there. But Lakewood Ranch, all of like the amenities for the most part that you would do outside the neighborhoods, and they're all public, so you have to live in there, is Waterside Place, which is like the main downtown they just built. It's lovely. They have downtown Lakewood Ranch, which is not far from Waterside Place. They have Center Point, which is another shop district, which is not far from that. University Town Center. These are all right there, so you can either go down here or go up here, get all of that. A little bit below that's a new one called Fruitville Commons, which is another mixed-use shopping district. There's not a lot in between. So all of this area, if you live, like Sky Ranch and all of that, is just central to everything. There's going to be a lot with High Hat and 3H Ranch developments eventually. But basically, if you just get here, you can look up here, look down to Venice. And then the other place that people mainly shoot is down here. So if you zoom out, though, you're like, we're talking this to this. This is where you'll find Welland Park. This is where you'll find Venice Island, which is the main downtown. And it's not really a barrier island, so it's a lot closer. Everything on the mainland is closer to the water here. But that's another historic shopping village. Then you have 4 beaches. You have Venice Beach, Casperson Beach, Brohard Beach is the only dog beach in the county. And then you have Minnesota Key Beach. And then it kind of just falls off, basically, to Cape Coral. And then you have a bunch of stuff in between. You have Nokomis Beach, you have Osprey, you have Palmer Ranch. But as far as like what everyone's online being like, if I lived here, how would I use the town? It's in those 3 districts. And then if you even live, say you lived at the very tip of one, it's not that crazy of a trek compared to where most people are coming from now. It really isn't. I mean, you're talking the tip of Welland Park to downtown Sarasota, which is south to north, is 45 minutes, 20 something miles. So I think that's something to really consider, because if you add let me show you real quick here, see if we keep this in the video or not. But if you have Dallas, Fort Worth, for instance, I mean, obviously a lot bigger town, but like you could say Orlando is not materially different. But look at this, look at a town where you have no water to bump things against. This is like my main point I make against other states is like, how the hell do you even begin to narrow options? And if you did, everybody would disagree with what they think is best. Maybe you could say, where's new construction at? But there's 700 developments in this area. So like the northern suburbs, a lot of people live up here, but like why? Is it do you commute to downtown Dallas? Is it how far you're from that, but also suburban housing? Do you not value it at all? How would you make sense of McKinney versus Plano? Like, what is the east versus the west? Like, having water and a small territory means that like west is taken care of. And then it's not, people aren't really arguing like Western Bradenton versus Lakewood Ranch in value, or Venice versus Lakewood Ranch. It gets a little bit more into stylistic and small cost differences. So I think that simplicity of learning a town is really interesting. All right, let's dive into myth number 2, and we'll just call this one master plan communities or nothing. And I would say the heavy majority of people that reach out to our organization are at least starting in this place. It's a great way to learn. No one beats this drum probably more than I do. But they're not just starting with new construction. They're kind of targeting these areas like Lakewood Ranch or Welland Park, Wiregrass Ranch, Nocatee, one of these concepts. Things that look very similar when you get here in person as they do online. For a lot of people, this makes a ton of sense, even through the whole purchasing decision. You get a new construction community with private amenities, but you don't only get that. You have a bunch of downtowns and all these communal amenities of a bunch of different neighborhoods coming together for like-minded things and interests. It's insular, you have schools in there, and it just feels like a thing. It's everything but the beach in a lot of respects in Southwest Florida. And I think that has a lot of merit, and at the very least, to basically start your search. The one thing that I would devil's advocate against, and which this whole video is about a give and a take. So if you said, okay, I liked a lot of what this was, but what else can I do? And you said, well, I definitely want new construction. If that was in the housing criteria, let's not change that. And maybe there's a builder within that master plan I like DeVosta. And I saw that they're doing these other 2 or 3 random communities to the south that are just kind of by themselves. What does that mean, like this random community sitting in Nokomis? Well, the advantage to keeping new construction and going to one that's not in the master plan is a lot of times location. What master plan is going to give you, or what it's going to take from you while giving you all that awesomeness that it does, is it has to be in places that have the space to do all that stuff. So you're going to be further east. You're going to be probably 15 to 20 miles from the main stuff in town 100% of the time, right? Like Lakewood Ranch can't build 50 communities post-1994 in the middle of downtown. And Welland Park can't do that. Like parts of Orlando can't do that with all the innovative stuff. They have to go to where the land's at. And so you basically go out there to get all of this, but you sacrifice the idea of going out there. And if you don't do that, but you keep new construction intact, a community come home you like, you have similar floor plans, then maybe you're 4 miles to the beach. Maybe you're like Payne Park, 1 mile outside of downtown Sarasota or something like that. Maybe you're Grandura with the new Pulte community where it's west of the interstate. But I do think it'd be worthwhile to not necessarily shove your way into master plan with reckless abandon, and maybe start there and then really juxtapose what else you could possibly do. And the one thing I'll just add on the back of that as we digress this particular point is actually how do you also live within the master plan? That's what gets blurred a ton of the time, is that all of master plan communities don't live and have access to all of those amenities in the same way. Lakewood Ranch is the greatest example of all time because it's so big. So if you said that, yeah, I lived in Lake House Cove, You're sitting in Lake House Cove with Homes by Town. You're in the Waterside District. Downtown Lakewood Ranch is just a couple miles away. Well, also like Center Point and University Town Center are built on University Parkway. So you got kind of the best of both worlds. But also, by the way, you're not that far from town because you're one of the closest communities. So you get the best of the suburb. That really gets you in the mix of a hard to replicate conversation for the price. But what if you're not there and you're in Star Farms? So you're in the community that's not 9 miles one way from downtown. You're in the community that is 21 in the northeast quadrant. You save money to do so, but now you're saying it might take you 10, 12, 15 minutes to get to your own suburban downtowns. That's how it happens, exactly like that. They're in Lakewood Ranch, and they're kind of hopping around, it doesn't work here, and they're just bleeding to these other districts, they end up in there. But if they would have came in their original search saying, I want to be 10 to 15 minutes or 20 minutes or under to everything, then they would have looked at all the neighborhoods that were in play for that same thing, which would open all of central Sarasota, north Sarasota, southern Sarasota would be 15 to 20 minutes from those same things as northeastern Lakewood Ranch or Lower Parish. But because it was a trickle of their home relocation journey, for lack of better words, they didn't really step back and say, well, what is my actual housing criteria now that I learned more about the town, and what could I buy within that? So that's another thing I would really consider too, because most people that live in the master plans aren't on top of all of the amenities. Then you should probably step back and say, what would I do if I could look at this whole thing again? All right, on to myth number 3, and this one is Venice, Florida is too slow / too sleepy. I think the interesting thing with when any part of a town starts to transition, evolve, change, all these kind of things, there's always a lag with where we currently sit today, definitely where we're going tomorrow, versus where we were yesterday. You know, Venice is a really great example of that. So Venice, Florida, it has historically was just junior Sarasota. It's very coastal, it's just south of it. It's different beaches, but it's still very close to the water, arguably closer. Has its own downtown. It was because everybody wanted to be north and this was south, then it was deemed like kind of far from those other things. It was the junior. It was a little cheaper. It was more affordable and slower, a retirement lifestyle. People would go right to Venice when other people are going left to downtown Sarasota because of both the cost, but also like they wanted something that was a little bit more laid back. And a lot of that still exists today as far as stylistic and overall feel and aesthetic. But the big difference in 2025 versus 20 years ago is that we have Welland Park. It has its own downtown, so you don't have to go to downtown Venice. Now you have both. You're 18 minutes or less, almost 100% of the communities, to 4 different beaches, which Lakewood Ranch can't say the same for. More boutique, but also the shape of this part of the state, even more than I introduced at the earlier section, is it gets narrower and narrower if you hug I-75, the interstate line. So it's easier to stay closer to the water as you go south just naturally because of the infrastructure. So you have all of that. You have now options of living below the island and above it. So you could say, I do want to be below Sarasota, but I don't want to commit to southern Venice. So you can live in Nokomis or Osprey and be not that far from Siesta Key and also not that far from the Venice stuff. I view Venice more of like parts of the Panhandle or even like a Wilmington, North Carolina. It feels like these are sleepy beach towns, which is like, you know, a lot of people are kind of like the idea of raising their kids in these kind of environments. But a lot of what people say is that there's like not a lot of kids down there. If you look at Venice Senior High School, which is a large school, I think it's 5, it might be 6A now. It's on the island. You have Laurel Nokomis, you have Pineview School for the Gifted, Venice Elementary, Venice Middle, you have the new Welland Park School. To say that kids are school choicing all the way down south and not living there as their homestead is not going to be the natural case. So it's not a lack of kids as much as it's probably the company you keep. There's always been a ton of kids down there. There's even more now. And I think it's basically in 2025, for one of the first times that I think's ever existed. I think that all of the reasons people originally wanted Venice because of that kind of laid back coastal environment still exists today. But if you are my age, you have 2 kids and you're 39, I think that lifestyle exists like in a way that it's never done before. And with this evolving demographic, the whole point of that lag is that you can be predatory as far as cost advantages because the town hasn't caught up. And people still have that hesitancy. It's still a little cheaper. It's still less saturated in certain respects. So if anything, I think that Venice, Florida is not only no longer junior Sarasota as much as a parallel choice against it, but I think it's also starting to bleed into the idea of cannibalizing northern Naples. I think if you said, I'm looking at Naples, Fort Myers versus Sarasota, Manatee, then would Venice potentially give you a better, more central option than like a Bonita Springs, Estero area if all is equal? because you can look down to Naples, up to Tampa Bay. You're an hour and a half to 2 major airports. Why not choose going more central than committing to the southern Lee or Collier County conversation? So I think there's a myriad of interesting points with this one. All right, number 4 on the list, just 2 more for you. We're going to talk waterfront. One of the recurring questions we get, or interest we get, is that people want to not only move here, but they really want some sort of like rear water exposure. And 99.9% of the time, they're not talking about the Bay or the Gulf of Mexico. They're actually talking about suburban lakes within new construction neighborhoods for the most part. I grew up in Florida my whole life pretty much, so I've always been curious of why that's such a big thing. The net migration we get is New Jersey, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Washington, D.C., Canada, things like this. I'm guessing that the day-to-day life there versus the idea of moving to Florida, palm trees, water, all that is a lot of it. But the one thing that I have found, not only my own personal opinion on it, but which I just see happening all the time, just like the master plan thing, is that people always start there. And these come at a premium. So you'll see regular lots on $600,000-$700,000 homes. The premium on the lot is over $100,000. A couple things to consider. Now, again, all of these are, you could disagree with these and say, that's actually what I want, or you've already done this and you're like, no, I'm very happy with what it is. But what I would say on this side, what I see a lot of times is, one, privacy. A lot of these lakes, if they're not massive, and most are not, outside of like Kingfisher, some of these unique lakes, you're going to be looking at a bunch of other people's lanais. And depending on the angle of your home and how you live, almost 100% of the people, not 100%, but a lot of the people have screened in pool patios against that lake. And you're going to be looking at each other's version of that. 2 is noise. Like, a lot of people don't realize these smaller lakes echo like crazy, let alone if you're next to near a pickleball court or something like that. It's not the quietest environment in the world, even though you might think the opposite. So you start to kind of stack these things. And to me, I think for the price premium, it could get a little anticlimactic because you also have restrictions that come with water views. So potentially you have to have a 2-foot shorter fence that's also see-through. Most of these lakes aren't recreational either. So it's not like you're out there boating and kayaking every day. There are lakes that you can do that, but a lot of times it's just purely the view. And the view, it's sitting water, so there's bugs, and I don't think gators are a day-to-day risk, knock on wood. And I'm not liable if you do get bit by a gator, but I know that's a lot of people's fear too. So with small dogs and all that kind of thing, there's a lot that comes with you saying, because I get that view, I'm trading all these things over there. Cost, restrictions, all these things, versus you saying that because all these other people value this, and I'm starting to wean on that value, then let them go right, I'll go left. Arguably, me personally, I'd rather go conservation. I think conservation, there's a lot of ways to look at even how far back that is, almost a guarantee of future development against it. I like kind of the wooded backyard myself personally. A lot of conservation lots are going to be cheaper than the water lots, so you could have similar kind of things you were trying to achieve. Or you could say, that $200,000 of premium pays for a pool. It pays for 2,900 square feet versus 2,200. There's some material different things you could do with it as far as that goes. So I think that's another thing I would definitely weigh. All right, my 5th and final myth is, it's a simple one, but it's just about traffic. We continue to hear this over and over, that people say, I hear traffic is horrible down there. I have a little bit more of an is what it is perspective on traffic in general. I mean, I think cool towns everybody wants to be in attract a lot of people. The roads never really catch up with it. So I think it's kind of like a give and take there. But if we vetted it out a little bit more, one, I would say traffic is a massive game of perspective. For anyone to assume that someone in Sarasota is telling you that traffic is bad, that is from Sarasota, they don't know if you're commuting an hour in 8 miles in Manhattan. They have no idea where you're from. And most cities are much larger than this area and live very different than this area. And to say that they're way better in traffic than ours, I would not see super usual. So the chance that we're at least equal to the traffic elsewhere, I think would be a pretty high probability. 2, I think they're trying to do a lot of things to mitigate that. The expansion is not going to stop. The people traveling and not just visiting is not going to stop. The homestead relocations is not going to stop. But what they're doing is they're doing these diamond roundabouts instead of lights in all these areas where it slightly slows things, doesn't bring it to a halt. They're doing those they're expanding the roads, the grids in Lakewood Ranch, Bourneside coming down, more ways to get to similar places is expanding. So I think all of that's going to help eventually. The one thing that I always go back to is, why are people in the town? That's a really big thing. If you move to Tampa or a lot of places similar to that, there is more of a culture than not that is live, work, play. And then everywhere everybody works are in 3 or 4 total districts. It's downtown Tampa, it's South Tampa, maybe it's the International Mall District, maybe you're going to St. Pete. But it creates a rush hour environment that the bigger the town gets, then it's basically an all day long rush hour, more or less, right? Because you have the 9 to 5, You have the people that try to beat that and do the 8 to 4. You have the people that try to beat that and do the 7 to 3. And then you have the staggered. I commuted every day for like 4 years from Wesley Chapel to Rocky Point, which is in that minutia. And you can't avoid it. One accident, you're screwed, all that kind of stuff. Sarasota, people are not relocating here to go to corporate workplaces for the most part. What creates the bad traffic environments for the most part is people rushing to the same places at similar times that are predictable. And if you add more people to that, you can't get on top of it. There's only so many hours in the day. If people are retired, then they're into different things. They're doing different things, and they can do them at different times. You can go to the beach in the morning. You can do all different things. If the downtown is not based on industry as much as it's hospitality, then it changes when people go and why. So downtown Sarasota is lovely. It's clean, it's walkable, it's not a thing. No one's rushing in there to work every day in the same way that you would have these big corporate environments. I think that is a real underrated thing to look at. And regardless of how busy this place gets, that will always be the case. The traffic thing, I would just say it's a grain of salt argument. There's more goods than bads. Folks, that is a wrap for today's edition of the Florida Relocation Guide. Again, my name is Adam Hancock. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel. We go mostly Sundays at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. Some Wednesdays as well. We have a ton of great stuff planned for the balance of the year. Subscribing is just the best way to simply see that. A couple housekeeping items. If I can assist you in the Southwest Florida real estate market at all, please consider reaching out. Really unique team. We own a boutique real estate brokerage. It's very much an extension of all of the points I'm trying to communicate here on YouTube. Very economics based and relocation based. So we think that this is something that doesn't have to be necessarily unpleasant. And a lot of what we've done with people already can help the person that hasn't done something yet. That's kind of the concept. We also have a cool thing called the Geeks Audit that I launched. It's just www.geeksaudit.com. And this allows you to get really far if you don't quite want to have a phone call. You don't want to get beat up with a realtor yet. You could fill out this form and it would allow us to basically say, this is what we would do and where we would do it based on what you want to do. No obligation beyond that. And then if you do take that to a phone call, then what better way to have context for that phone call, in my opinion. So people have seemed to really enjoy that. That's kind of what I would want if I was in a lot of people's faces watching these YouTube videos. So please consider that. I think the idea that even if you're far out and you're hesitant to ask questions because you don't want to get involved with someone and not be able to take it back later, I'd really reconsider that. A couple conversations early, even if you're not ready to make a decision, allows your research to materially change. That's something that I found to be really useful. And a lot of the feedback we get is like, I wish I would have reached out earlier. So please do not hesitate. On our side, we are not a place amongst all the places that are going to try to tie you into anything. Exclusivity, nothing like that. We're not going to badger you. We just want to have smart conversations when you're ready to have them. Website, we have relocation guides, written word versions of the videos, audio only versions of the videos, and a bunch of other fun stuff about Southwest Florida. Thank you guys so much for consuming my content. We'll see you on the next one.